Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Patryk Witkowski and I am joined today by Olaf Stando, who is the campaigns manager at NUS Scotland. Say hello.
Hi, Patrick. Great to be here.
Hey, lovely to have you again.
How's it going?
Our first story of the day is the Ukraine update, day 727 of the conflict. A Russian helicopter pilot who defected to Ukraine with his aircraft in 2023 has been found dead in Spain, according to the main military intelligence agency in Kiev, the GUR. Spanish media said Maxim Kuzminov was found shot 12 times on a car park ramp underneath an apartment block in the town of Villajoyosa in Alicante on the Mediterranean coast. On Monday, Alexei Navalny's widow, Yulia Navalnaya, published a video address in which she vowed to continue her late husband's political work and called on Russians to rally around her. Ukraine shot down two more Russian warplanes used to drop guided aerial bombs. Army Chief Alexander Syrsky said that the Russian warplanes were used to drop guided aerial bombs. The destroyed planes were an Su-34 fighter bomber and an Su-35 fighter, Syrsky wrote on the Telegram. Over the weekend, Ukraine said it had shot down 3 Russian Su-34s and 1 Su-35. Ukrainian troops were facing heavy fire from Russian forces on the southern Zaporozhye region. A Ukrainian army spokesperson was quoted by AFP as saying, "It comes after Russia said it had taken full control of the eastern Ukrainian city of Avdiivka, in its biggest gain since capturing Bakhmut last May after a retreat by Ukrainian troops." Ukraine's government has said it is trying to work with SpaceX to prevent Russian invaders using Starlink, Elon Musk's satellite internet service. "We found an algorithm and made a proposal to SpaceX," said Mikhailo Fedorov, a Ukrainian government minister. Sweden will also announce military assistance to Ukraine of SEK-7, one of Ukraine's SEK-7, £1 billion, 1 BN today. Sorry, the Ukrainian SEK-7, 1 BN today, according to Dagens Nyheter, a Swedish news outlet. It works to about £540 million. Russia is exploiting delays in aid to Ukraine, and the situation in areas where Russian troops are concentrated is extremely difficult, Volodymyr Zelensky said. Ukraine's president spoke visiting the front line in the Kupiansk sector in the northeast. President Biden said he was willing to meet with the speakers of the House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, to discuss Ukraine funding, adding that Republicans are making a mistake by opposing it. The Senate this month passed a $95 billion aid package that includes funds to Ukraine, but Johnson has refused to bring it up for a vote to the floor of the House, which Republicans control by a 219 to a 212 margin. NBC News reported the White House was prepared to send long-range tactical missiles to Ukraine if Congress approves a new funding package. Canada will donate more than 800 Skyranger R-70 multi-mission drones to Ukraine, Canada's Defense Minister Bill Blair has said. Red Cross said it was trying to find out what happened to 23,000 people who have disappeared over the course of Russia's war in Ukraine. The International Committee of the Red Cross said it was seeking to determine whether they had been captured, killed, or had lost contact after fleeing their homes. Belgium's Foreign Minister, Hadia Labib, has called on the EU to develop an army amid increasing nervousness about Russian aggression. Olaf, passing over to you, how do you feel about how the conflict in Ukraine has developed over time?
Well, I think clearly we're seeing stalemate, and that is exacerbated by the Republicans playing political football over this. It's very clear that Donald Trump doesn't want to solve this problem. He wants, in his own words, to solve this in 24 hours, which means ceding huge territory to Putin and essentially allowing Putin to get away not just with what he did to Navalny, but with things that are much worse than this. So it's shattering to see actually the Republicans so paralysed over this. It's good to see that Europe is picking up the mantle to an extent. Obviously, Europe's capability as it stands, is quite limited if you compare it to America. But very encouraging to see what's happening in Sweden. Firstly, very encouraging that Broadcasting Scotland is at the forefront of reporting on Ukraine, because obviously there's so much going on, but Ukraine is still hugely important, and we're coming up to that 2-year anniversary of the full-scale invasion. And look, I mean, extremely courageous fights on the Ukrainian battlegrounds. I can't imagine how difficult it must be right now in the snow and in the cold. But it's really important that Ukraine is supported, because it's not just about Ukrainian sovereignty, it's about freedom and democracy in the rest of Europe.
Thank you so much. For our next story, we've got the Israel update, the Israel-Gaza latest. UN agency UNICEF has warned the Gaza Strip is poised to witness an increase in what an official has said was the already unbearable level of child deaths due to a worsening food crisis. It says more than 90% of children under 5 in Gaza are in food poverty, with a similar percentage affected by infectious diseases, and 70% experiencing diarrhea in the last 2 weeks. The World Health Organization, WHO, has accused Israel of impeding hospital rescue missions at the Nasser hospital in southern Gaza. The agency reported its staff said the destruction around Nasser hospital was indescribable, and that it was concerned for an estimated 130 sick and injured patients and at least 15 doctors and nurses who remain at the medical complex, which has no electricity or running water. The total number of Palestinians detained by the Israeli security forces from the occupied West Bank since the 7th of October has risen to 7,120, according to local sources. Overnight, the IDF confirmed that one of its soldiers, who had been wounded during the ground offensive in Khan Yunis on the 15th of February, had died, taking Israel's total losses on the ground inside Gaza to 236. Israeli government spokesperson Eilion Levy has condemned the UN report, which said there were credible allegations of egregious human rights violations of Palestinian women and girls by Israeli security forces, including rape and strip searches, as motivated by hatred of Israel and the Jewish people. End quote. In its latest operational update, Israel's military has claimed it continues to operate in the northern, central, and southern Gaza Strip, and says it has eliminated a terrorist cell that attempted to attack the troops. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh has reportedly arrived in Cairo and talks with Egyptian officials. French warships in the Red Sea intercepted and destroyed 2 drones in overnight attacks coming from Yemen, according to France's Ministry of Defense. South Africa's delegation, the ICJ, in The Hague, has said Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory is an even more extreme form of the apartheid than the one formerly in place in South Africa. The court is holding a second day of hearings, asking it to give an advisory opinion on the Israeli occupation. Olaf, do you think the international pressure on Israel is changing at all, or are you seeing more of the same as from October 7th till now?
Well, look, it better be, because Gaza is being starved and it's being under siege. And for every single day that this crisis is being allowed to continue, it doesn't just fail people in Gaza, the world's biggest open air prison, but our humanity itself. It's very encouraging to see the movement from Labour, by the way, on the ceasefire, and I'm sure that we're going to talk about this tonight. But the international community has to step up and stop equivocating on this. I think the fact that Israel can condemn the UN, the global body of which it's a member, and where it's signed up to human rights conventions, which is blatantly ignoring. I think the fact that they can just fabricate every single UN report based on the facts on the ground as somewhat, anti-Semitic or motivated by hatred of Jews. Firstly, it's a gross misconstruction of anti-Semitism, and it's actually very insulting. I say that as a Jewish person, by the way. I do not at all condone what Israel is doing. Now, of course, by the way, every single country has the right to defend themselves. Israel has the right to defend themselves. I think what happened on October the 7th was a horrific terrorist attack, which has to be condemned. And I think every reasonable person does condemn Hamas as a terror organization. But it doesn't give Israel at all, and it never has on any day, give a carte blanche to do attacks like this. I mean, we have 1.5 million people trapped in Rafah, which is the area smaller than Falkirk, I believe. Um, you know, suffering famine and suffering hunger as the army moves closer and closer. I mean, think about this. When Israel began this military campaign, they told people in the north of Gaza to move to the center of Gaza. They then told these people to move to Han Yunis. Then they started bombing Han Yunis. They then told them to move to a tiny old wasteland of Al Mawasi, which they bombed as well. And now the entirety of the Gaza Strip almost has moved to Rafah, which is about to be attacked as well, unless the world steps up and stops this deeply irresponsible genocidal attack by the Israeli government. So look, it's hugely depressing. I mean, there's a lot of people that had to flee and displace 4, 5, 6, 7 times. I mean, people have been dying of hunger as well as being bombed under rubble. So it's extremely, extremely concerning. And I just hope that, just like the world has showed that Putin's actions won't be tolerated, and just like Europe has stood up very clearly and unequivocally to Putin's, genocidal killings in Bucha, the world applies the same standard to Israel's actions, which are increasingly transparent to be not self-defense at all. It's not about self-defense anymore. It's collective punishment, and we have to call it what it is.
Thank you. And just like you hinted at the beginning there, our next story is Labour calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza for the first time in an attempt to head off what threatens to be the biggest rebellion against Keir Starmer since he was made party leader. Opposition whips published a 237-word amendment to the Scottish National Party motion, setting out the party's stance in the Middle East crisis, which they hope Labour MPs will back instead of a separate amendment from the SNP calling more bluntly for an immediate ceasefire. The Labour wording goes further than the party has in the past in calling for a ceasefire. Last weekend, Starmer said he wanted the fighting to stop now, but he had been reluctant to back an immediate and permanent ceasefire. The SNP has welcomed Sir Keir Starmer's U-turn on supporting an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Commenting, SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn MP said, "I welcome this long overdue U-turn from Sir Keir Starmer, who now appears to support the SNP's call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza." However, the plain truth is Sir Keir was forced into this position through public pressure and in particular by the SNP. It's telling that it took the SNP to insert a backbone into the Labour Party and act as Westminster's conscience on the conflict. This change of position shows that Scotland can achieve what Scotland can achieve when a strong team of SNP MPs puts pressure on the Labour Party to act in line with our values. Since Westminster rejected a ceasefire in November, more than 29,000 Palestinian children, women and men have been killed. It's vital MPs don't make the same mistake again. The focus is now squarely on Rishi Sunak. Both he and Keir Starmer shared the same position until now. I hope he now takes the opportunity to reverse his stance too. That was the quote from Stephen Flynn. Olaf, what do you think of that? Does this put pressure on Rishi Sunak as more of the UK backs a ceasefire amongst politicians, that is?
Well, yes, 100%. I mean, look. Firstly, this motion will be meaningless unless at least some Tory MPs vote for this, and ideally, unless the UK government backs this, right? It will not pass given the numbers. So I think for the sake of Palestinians in Gaza, who so desperately need that ceasefire, and for the sake of sending a strongest signal yet from a major European player, I think it's essential that Rishi Sunak backs it. Now, David Cameron has made some positive noises about ceasefire, not quite using the same terminology as a permanent ceasefire. There's been some fudge applied there by David Cameron, but I think there has been movement, and big credit to the SNP group for pushing this consistently. I think it's very clear that Stephen Flynn and Hamza Yousaf have provided this moral leadership from day one. I mean, of course, Hamza Yousaf, just days after this conflict broke out, had his family trapped in Gaza, and yet he was out there on the media calling for a ceasefire as a first leader, among the first Western leaders to do so. Also calling for a humanitarian refugee scheme to be set up so we can actually take in people that are able to leave. There's been a huge amount of good work by the SNP on this, and it's just a shame that Labour had to be dragged kicking and screaming into this position because of political reasons, it looks like. It looks like Starmer wanted to avoid another split in his party, which is why he was dragged towards this position in the end. It took way too long. Of course, look, neither the SNP nor Labour will, make a ceasefire happen, right? Like there is a lot at play there, but it's important that the Western community sends the strongest possible signal because the Israeli army has given the ultimatum that they'll start bombing Rafah and attacking 1.5 million people in the biggest open air prison in the world. And the time is ticking. And what we now need is we need strong action from the US, which again, there's been some movement from Joe Biden. It's not enough. We need stronger action from the EU. And look, Israel can be forced to stop this because Israel depends on the West's support, both morally, financially, and militarily. But it's really important to stop prevaricating and just get on with it. We need a ceasefire right now.
So you mentioned that you kind of view this on Keir Starmer's part more as like a political play. Would you expect Sir Keir Starmer to long term uphold this drive for a ceasefire if the Labour Party was to vote for it?
Look, no, I don't want to make jokes about Keir Starmer's flip flops because frankly this is too serious for that. But look, Keir Starmer has a long history of breaking his own promises. We'll believe it when we see it, but it's really important that he does because he might be prime minister in a couple of months' time. He is already being listened to as a voice of authority by a lot of Western leaders who know that he'll be prime minister in a couple of months' time. And it is extremely important, again, not for the sake of Labour, not for the sake of, being morally right or whatever, for the sake of the Palestinian people that are dying right now, every single day, for there to be a ceasefire and for there to be a concerted, united voice from every single party in the UK and indeed every single country in Europe to make this happen.
Thank you so much. Our next story, Julian Assange extradition appeal hearing begins. Julian Assange faces the risk of a flagrant denial of service if tried in the US, his lawyers have told a permission to appeal hearing in London, which could result in the WikiLeaks founder being extradited within days if unsuccessful. Assange, who published thousands of classified military and diplomatic documents relating to the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, could be jailed for up to 175 years, a grossly disproportionate measure, quote, if convicted in quoting someone, I assume his lawyers, if convicted in the US, the High Court heard on Tuesday. Edward Fitzgerald, KC, representing Assange, also argued that his client could be targeted by US state agencies for extra-legal attack elimination if he was extradited, particularly given the real possibility of a return of a Donald Trump administration. Assange's lawyers are seeking a full appeal hearing. If the two judges deny permission, all challenges in the UK court will have been exhausted, leaving an intervention by the European Court of Human Rights, ECHR, on Assange's only hope to avoid extradition to the US. Outside the court, scores of his supporters held placards and chanted, demanding his release. The WikiLeaks founder was granted permission to attend the two-day hearing, but Fitzgerald said Assange was unwell. Sorry. Apologies. Fitzgerald told the court that if Assange was extradited, there was a real risk that he'll suffer a flagrant denial of service. In written arguments, Fitzgerald said, "This legally unprecedented prosecution seeks to criminalize the application of ordinary journalistic practices of obtaining and publishing true classified information of the most obvious and important public interest." Among the grounds on which Assange is seeking permission to appeal is the claim that his extradition is in breach of the extradition treaty between the UK and the US, which prohibits doing so for political offences. Assange faces 17 charges of espionage, which Fitzgerald said was manifestly a political offence and politically motivated, as well as one of computer misuse. If Assange is refused permission to appeal, he will have to reply to the ECHR to order the UK not to extradite him while it considers his case. If the application is refused, he could be removed from the country by US Marshals within days. The US will have the opportunity to make oral arguments on Wednesday, but in written arguments, it accused Assange's lawyers of having consistently and repeatedly misrepresented the case. James Lewis Casey said the WikiLeaks founder was not being prosecuted for mere publication, but for aiding and abetting or conspiring with the whistleblower Chelsea Manning to unlawfully obtain the documents in question, undoubtedly committing serious criminal offenses in so doing, and then disclosing the unredacted names of sources, thus putting individuals at grave risk of harm. Olaf, what do you think of this claim that Assange is just like any other journalist?
Well, look, I mean, if this prosecution is successful, there might be lots of different other cases that never come to light. And of course, Assange was exposing very, very concerning and harrowing accounts of the war and the way that the US is acting, holding truth to power as journalists should be. And look, I'm not going to dispute whether everything that Julian Assange has done was legal or not. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not claiming to be an expert on this. But firstly, I think his extradition would be a breach of the European Convention of Human Rights and the right to free speech. That's very clearly stated in this. In the end, as a journalist, you've got freedoms that are granted not just to journalists but to all of us of free speech. Of course, what you raised as well about the prospect of Trump becoming president, you can imagine that if Assange is extradited, he might face the most harrowing, the worst treatment, possibly even getting towards the territory of torture. Of course, already in Belmarsh, Julian Assange is too unwell to actually attend the proceedings in person. So if he was extradited to the US and held in even worse conditions, I mean, it's unimaginable what he's going through. And I think this is so important, especially now when governments are increasingly authoritarian, whether it's in the US, the prospect of an authoritarian Trump presidency, or whether it's in Europe. Protecting journalistic integrity is extremely, extremely important. And this is not just a battle for Julian Assange or Chelsea Manning. This is very much about, to what extent can journalists expose truth to power? And it just matters so much.
Do you think, however, that Julian Assange's actions could have put people at risk, could have put lives at risk? And if so, does he deserve to face trial for that?
I think, look, he, as far as I'm aware, has not exposed any names, and there is no people in immediate danger. I think it's precious for journalists to be able to expose wrongdoing and to expose governments overstepping their duty and overstepping their actions. So I think he does not deserve to be tried. I mean, again, I don't want to prejudice the trial. I don't want to say anything that goes against legal opinion, but I do think that Julian Assange is a symbol of groundbreaking and free journalism, which exposes politicians and exposes governments when they have not been acting properly. So look, it's really important. I fully stand with Julian Assange. I think his treatment from the US has been awful, and I think it'd be good for humanity, good for everyone involved, for him to be freed.
Yeah.
Because we need more scrutiny and we need more openness, not less.
Just going off of James Lewis Casey's quote from that story, the claim is that there was a dumping of unredacted names that could have potentially put people in danger. But that is obviously still a contested part of the case. For our next story, we've got the Cameron government facing questions over the post office dropping the Horizon investigation while it was in power. The SNP has called on former Prime Minister David Cameron to come clean on what he knew about the Horizon scandal and cover-up after fresh reports revealed his government was aware of an investigation that could have cleared wrongfully accused sub-postmasters in 2016. The SNP said the report Said reports were further confirmation of how badly sub-postmasters were let down by the UK government and called for urgent action to exonerate victims and provide them with a full financial redress they are owed. Commenting, the SNP's business spokesperson, Richard Thompson MP, said thousands of lives were ruined over decades by a scandal that has only recently begun to receive the attention it deserves. It is shocking the government could have done something earlier and didn't. David Cameron and his former ministers have serious questions to answer and must come clean over what they knew and why they didn't act to deliver justice sooner. Under the UK government's watch, people have died without ever having their wrongful convictions overturned and in a state of deep financial distress over money they were forced to pay to the post office. Now it appears much of that was entirely preventable in a report that highlights just how badly the UK government has let down the victims in the scandal. There can be no more delays. This government can and must act to exonerate and provide full financial redress to everyone who has needlessly suffered as a result of this scandal. If there was to have been a cover-up, which is unconfirmed as at this point, what would a standing government have to gain from covering up such reports?
Of course, a cover up is not confirmed, but it wouldn't be the first time from the UK government, whether it's the cover up or Windrush, of course, under David Cameron, or many other scandals. This is a Tory government mired in scandal. And look, a lot of this happened before the privatisation of the post office by David Cameron. But of course, David Cameron is the person who sold off the post office to the highest bidder, although not very much. And David Cameron, if it is true that he knew about this and wanted to cover up, it's a huge scandal. It needs to be he needs to be held to account for this. Of course, the post office has been managed very, very badly even before privatization. There's been a culture of corporate impunity at the top. We've seen, countless lives devastated, people that were, pillars in the community, people that were trusted in the community and accused of theft, and having their lives and livelihood ruined. Of course, some of them driven to death because of the stress and the shame and the huge amounts of debt that they were landed with. So it is a scandal. It's also a scandal that it took a TV drama to cause a stir that should have been caused much, much earlier. I mean, it is the fact that Alan Bates and a lot of the other sub-postmasters have been campaigning against the scandal for years. So look, we'll have to wait and see for the UK ministers to come clean and to answer, but they must answer, because I think it would be hugely cynical for the current UK government to pretend like it's on the side of postmasters and pretend like it's acting quickly, and then the same party in government, Rishi Sunak's party, and David Cameron, to have covered up a scandal which has ruined so many lives. It's emblematic, really, of the culture of contempt towards working people that this government has, and always siding with corporate bosses over ordinary people, and not quite taking ordinary people's words as a given. I think we need answers on this, and hopefully more information will come to light.
Thank you. In our next story, farmers call for solution to Brexit-related labour problems and a 5-year seasonal worker scheme. At the National Farmers Union conference today, Rishi Sunak told farmers that he has their backs as he promised to change the culture in government around farming. Sunak was the first Prime Minister to address the NFU conference since Gordon Brown in 2008, and took 3 DEFRA ministers with him to put the Conservatives' case to farmers. He committed to improving food security in the UK and expressed concerns about low self-sufficiency in things like tomatoes, pears, plums, lettuces, and apples. Sunak also said he had once milked a cow. He took 2 questions from the audience, replying to one farmer, Hannah, from Hertfordshire. He admitted that allowing farmers to trade with the EU was a work in progress. Farmers have been critical of trade deals undercutting their business, including the free trade with Australia and the prospect of importing Canadian pork and Mexican beef. Sunak said, "We are absolutely committed to supporting you and making sure that you are not undercut." Recent polling from a country land and business association found that people in rural areas of England are defecting to Labour in huge numbers, with the party's share of a vote having climbed to 37%, up 17 on the 2019 general election results, and the Conservatives' share falling 25 points to 34%. Minette Batters, leading her last NUF conference as president, said the farming vote was still up for grabs. She asked for Brexit-related Labour problems to be solved. Meanwhile, it was revealed today that UK government officials buried an analysis of the post-Brexit financial prospects to some of the most vulnerable farmers in the UK after realizing it was almost entirely bad news. The analysis was to have been part of an optimistic look at the financial situation for upland farmers, some of the poorest in the country. But minutes from meetings about the plans obtained through a Freedom of Information request have revealed concerns were raised about the negative findings. The documents showed that UK government officials admitted that upland farmers were falling into financial crisis and might go out of business. Farming groups said it was irresponsible not to make the analysis public after the FOI documents showed officials refused to publish it as ministers would not like it. Olaf, what do you think of the current farmer situation and how it relates to Brexit?
Well, look, all these benefits of Brexit that we were promised, the land of milk and honey, we have less milk and less honey in shops, and it's more and more expensive. And it's more difficult to get, tomatoes and apples and all the basics. That, we were promised this El Dorado of riches. Do you remember, like Boris Johnson, Michael Gove said it's going to be the easiest deal in history to negotiate. We instead got, years of border chaos and the weakest economy in the G7, and farmers absolutely shafted. But hey, fear not, because we got the deal with New Zealand, which will give, I think, 0.03% of GDP gain by 2035. So that's great. Of course, Brexit is around 20 times as bad for the economy and for farmers as any potential gain from the New Zealand deal and Australia deal, which was agreed and again much touted by the Conservative government. It's actually highly damaging to the Scottish food and drink industry. I mean, you had Scottish farmers' unions in uproar about the Australia deal because it's undercutting essentially the high quality produce that we have in Scotland and threatening to flood the market with low quality, hormone fed beef. But look, by the by, Brexit is really, really damaging for farmers. We have huge staff shortages, especially in the Highlands in the summer. We need more fruit pickers, we need more farmers, we need all sorts of workers, not just in agriculture, but across Scotland and across the UK. And I just think it's so obvious that Brexit has been a disaster in all sorts of sectors, right? In farming, in all sorts of sectors apart from that. And yet we have this conspiracy of silence where the Tories would rather not talk about Brexit. Rishi Sunak was at the NFU conference, not a single mention. Labour doesn't want to talk about Brexit because they back Brexit and they know it's unjustifiable, but they back it anyway because they're too scared to grow a backbone and they're too dependent on the votes of Tory voters from 2019. And this really illustrates, doesn't it, how Scotland desperately needs to get back into the EU because we have a great farming industry. We have a fantastic food and drink industry that's renowned the world over, but they're just being shafted by a government that doesn't care and gaslit by a government that says, look, we got a New Zealand deal, we got an Australia deal. None of these come close to what we lost from Brexit. And it's hugely concerning. I really hope, for the sake of Scotland's farmers, but for the sake of our economy, that Scotland is independent as quickly as possible. Frankly, that's the only way that we can get back into the EU. It's the only way that we can trade properly and sell our wonderful produce. And it's the only way that we can rid ourselves of these pathetic governments which are willing to sell out our industry for their political gain.
Thank you. Four arrested and the ransomware network seized in international criminal investigation. The entire command and control apparatus for the ransomware group Lockbit is now in possession of law enforcement, the UK's National Crime Agency has revealed, after it emerged that it had received the criminal gang's website in a coordinated international operation. The flood of data hacked back from the hackers has already led to 4 arrests, and the authorities promised on Tuesday to repurpose the technology to expose the group's operation to the world. The joint operation between NCA, the FBI, Europol, and a coalition of international police agencies has revealed with a post on Lockbit's own website, which read, "This site is now under the control of the National Crime Agency of the UK, working in close cooperation with the FBI and the International Law Enforcement Task Force Operation Kronos." Europol said that 2 Lockbit actors had been arrested in Poland and Ukraine, and that a further 2 defendants, thought to be affiliates, had been arrested and charged in the US. 2 more individuals have been named and are Russian nationals Russian nationals still at large. Authorities have also frozen more than 200 cryptocurrency accounts linked to the criminal organization. Disruption to the Lockbit operation is significantly greater than first revealed. As well as taking control of the public-facing website, the NCA seized Lockbit's primary administration environment, the infrastructure that allowed it to manage and deploy the technology that it used to extort businesses and individuals across the world. Through our close collaboration, we have hacked the hackers, taken control of their infrastructure, seized their source code, and obtained keys that will help victims decrypt their systems, said Graham Bigger, the NCA's Director General. As of today, Lockbit are locked out. We have damaged the capability and, most notably, the credibility of a group that depended on secrecy and anonymity. Olaf, I suppose as more and more of crime gets networked and technologized, I suppose, there's going to be increased reliance for these different groups to start working internationally. A network crime is not going to be localized to a specific area. I suppose. Do you think we're making good progress in these kind of network-related crimes?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is hugely encouraging news, and obviously, congratulations to the NCA and FBI and Europol for tackling this. And look, cooperation on this stuff just makes sense, doesn't it? It's common sense, and for as long as safe havens for hackers exist, like Russia, for example, like China, this threat will keep coming up. Of course, our politics, our banking, everything, every single aspect of our life is getting more and more digital. Which means that we get more prone to the hacking. Obviously, these agencies are working hard to tackle this at source, but more cooperation is definitely good. And it is concerning to see that we, at the same time, have this kind of retreat against cooperation and this idea that countries don't have to work together. They can just solve everything on their own. I mean, obviously, we see that with Trump. We see that with some of the authoritarian far-right leaders in Europe as well. When it comes to tackling cybercrime, it's got to be done together. It's got to be done coordinated. I think more cooperation on this front is really, really welcome. Yeah, great to see. I mean, imagine what could have been if the NCA had not locked Lockbit out. Yeah, good on them.
Great, thank you. Donald Trump is ranked as the worst US president in history. Donald Trump finished at 45th at the bottom of a list ranking US presidents by greatness, trailing behind even historically calamitous chief executives who failed to stop the Civil War or botched its aftermath. Worse for a likely Republican nominee this year, his likely opponent, Joe Biden, debuted at number 14. Biden's most important achievements may be that he rescued the presidency from Trump, resumed, this is a quote, by the way, from the report. Biden, not a statement of broadcast in Scotland. Biden's most important achievements may be that he rescued the presidency from Trump, resumed a more traditional style of presidential leadership, and is geared up to keep the office out of his predecessor's hands this fall. Justin Vaughn, Brandon Rotengos, the political scientist behind the survey, said and wrote in the Los Angeles Times. Rotengos of the University of Houston and Vaughn from Coastal Carolina University Consider responses from 153 scholars, most connected to the American Political Science Association. The aim, the author said, was to create a ranking of presidential greatness that covered all presidents from George Washington to Joe Biden, in succession in such lists compiled in 2015 to 2018. To do this, we asked respondents to rate each of the presidents on a scale of 0 to 100 for their overall greatness, with 0 being failure, 50 being average, and 100 being great. We then averaged the ratings for each president and ranked them from highest average to lowest. At the top of the chart, there was little change from previous surveys, with Abraham Lincoln, who won the Civil War and ended slavery, was ranked first, ahead of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who saw the U.S. through the Great Depression and the Second World War. Next came George Washington, the first president who won independence from Britain, Teddy Roosevelt, Thomas Jefferson, and Harry Truman. Trump came in last for the second time. Barack Obama, the first black president between 2009 and 2017, was 7th, up 9 places. Considering drops from Andrew Jackson, 9th in 2015 to 21st now, and Woodrow Wilson, 10th to 15th, Rotingos and Vaughn noted the impact of campaigns for racial justice. Jackson owned enslaved people and presided over the genocidal displacement of Native Americans. Wilson oversaw victory in the First World War and helped set up the League of Nations, but was an avowed racist who segregated the federal workforce. Other major movers included Ulysses S. Grant, 17th, up from 26th in 2015, whose administration generated significant corruption, but whose attempts to reinforce post-Civil War Reconstruction in southern states, including fighting the Ku Klux Klan, have helped fuel reconsideration. Trump is a uniquely divisive figure, his legislative record slim, his refusal to accept defeat by Biden, leading to a deadly attack on Congress, and his post-presidential career dogged by 91 criminal charges arising from actions in office or on the campaign trail. Olaf, I wonder if you're surprised by Donald Trump's position in the list.
Look, I mean, the story just writes itself, right? I mean, you said it. Like we have greats like Abraham Lincoln, who obviously ended the Civil War and ended slavery. Greats like FDR steering the country through the Great Depression, and then Donald Trump has got 91 criminal charges. Presided over an insurrection of the Capitol. The very democracy that America holds so much in pride. We had the rise of fascism out there on the streets, marching and shouting things like "Jews will not replace us" under Donald Trump. These are people that have backed him. We've had the Muslim ban, and we've had Trump staring at the sun from the balcony of the White House and talking about injecting bleach into himself during the COVID pandemic. Look, there is just such a huge amount of scandal following that man every single day that it's unimaginable that he could not come last. And it's funny, isn't it? Because it's the ranking of greatness. The man who talks about making America great again, when in reality all he cares about is making Trump great again. And yet there's a half of the American population, as the polls stand, who are prepared to back this person and send him to the White House again, with 91 criminal charges, the first president ever to possibly win, not just with any criminal charge, but with 91 criminal, counts against him. It is absolutely bizarre. And look, it's actually a symbol of American decline, where the choice is between Joe Biden, who, it's increasingly senile and undoubtedly a very good man and a person who cares deeply for America's soul, but perhaps not entirely fit to be president at this age, and Donald Trump, who is just insane. He might be the leader of the free world in November. Americans deserve so much more than this. The choice is frankly awful, and it is just remarkable. It's remarkable that so much of the world's future, a safety when it comes to the war, and our economic security as well. So much of it rests on America, and yet Donald Trump might be presiding over all of this. He
I guess,
deserves to be erased
yeah.
from America's future, and he should not be back in the White House. I mean, that's very, very clear.
Yeah, I suppose it also speaks to the divisiveness currently found in U.S. politics when a poll among scholars will find Trump being like the worst of the worst of the worst, while while amongst the public, almost half of people are willing to basically redefine what it means to be Republican around Trump. So it kind of shows the separation in like different groups of people amongst Americans.
And do you know? Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna move on to the next story, but if you have a quick
Yeah,
thing, you can
it's just
fire.
like this is the embodiment of post-truth politics, right? Because obviously Michael Gove said in 2016 we've had enough of experts, and this is what's happening right now in America as well, where if an expert says something or if something is patently true, if evidence shows something, a lot of the time the public will actively go against this because there's now this cult of a conspiracy madness fueled by Trump himself. Whenever a criminal charge is unveiled against him, he shoots up in the polls because everything is apparently a deep state conspiracy.
Hmm.
It used to be the case a couple of years ago that this was on the very fringes of the internet, nowhere near the mainstream. Right now, it is shared by half the population, which is horrifying. And I think it demands a whole separate news item, actually, and a big conversation about this because it's just shocking, isn't it?
Well, we look forward to having you on again to talk about it. For our next story, we have the Hollywood debate, Hollywood debating the social security in an independent Scotland. In a debate in Hollywood today, the Scottish government argued that people in receipt of benefits would be better protected and treated with more dignity and respect in an independent Scotland. Social Justice Secretary Shirley Ann Somerville said the ministers are building on the progress the Scottish government has already made in creating a fairer system with limited powers as she renewed calls for the UK government to introduce an essentials guarantee to ensure that social security benefits are already enough to cover the cost of basic vital items such as food and heating. The Scottish Government funds local authorities to provide discretionary housing payments to help mitigate UK government policies, including the bedroom tax and the benefit cap. The 2024 to 2025 budget, if passed by Parliament, will increase the funding by £6.8 million, an 8%. Um, Increasing it to £92.7 million. £2.2 million will be distributed to councils to cover administration of funding. Modelling estimates that 90,000 fewer children will live in relative and absolute poverty in 2023 to 24 as a result of this government's policies, with poverty levels 9 percentage points lower than than it would have been otherwise. This includes lifting an estimated 50,000 children out of relative poverty through our Scottish Child Payment. Ms. Somerville said, our early priorities would be removing policies like the two-child limit, the rape clause, and the benefit cap. We plan to replace the universal credits, advance loans with grants. We could end the punitive sanctions regime, and we could remove the young parent penalty. We also propose to roll back planned changes to reserved sickness and disability benefits, and to do more to help unpaid carers. There are early changes we would prioritize, among others, to directly improve the lives of people in receipt of benefits and make the right steps towards an essentials guarantee. The best performing independent countries of Scotland's size show that a strong social safety net can be the foundation of a dynamic, innovative, and productive economy. I have no doubt that over time, Scotland can match the performance of other independent European countries and have low levels of poverty and inequality and high levels of economic success. With independence, Scotland has potential to deliver transformational change, building on our success to date, bringing a fairer, more equal society, and ensuring everyone has enough money and to live decent, dignified, healthy life. The Scottish Government's motion was passed unamended by 63 votes to with 63 votes for and 53 against. Olaf, would you agree that an independent Scotland would have a fairer social security system? I suppose last time you were on, you were talking about the SNP's efforts to make voting more accessible and fairer for people. So how does that relate to this story?
I mean, of course it would. Look, in the independent Scotland, tackling poverty would be in our DNA, right? It's all about reshaping the economy so that it works for people, and not for profit. And of course, it's so important that every single government takes tackling poverty as the number one priority. Because if we have poverty, our economic growth will be impeded. If we have poverty, children's education will be struggling as well. If we have poverty, we're going to have less engagement in the community. Poverty is bad for everyone involved, and poverty is a spiral as well. The longer you're in poverty, the harder it is to get out of it, which is why it's so important that the Scottish Government is tackling it at the roots. Of course, the Scottish Government can't do everything. The Scottish Government has, I think, around 20% of social security budget. The majority of it is still universal credit, and the majority of it lies at Westminster. So, if this much could be done, imagine how much more could be done if all the powers were devolved and if we were a normal, independent country, just like any other. Of course, the Scottish Child Payment is hugely significant. I feel like a lot of folk take it for granted, and especially the Labour Party, which has been calling for it, now obviously criticising the government for having slightly higher taxes, where people earning over £28,500 pay £6 more than they would in England. And what they get for it is, of course, free tuition, free prescriptions, free eye tests, Scottish Child Payment, lots more. The hypocrisy there laid bare. But back to the Scottish Child Payment. Look, it was introduced in, I think, 2021 or something like that, right? 2020. It was initially £10, I believe. It is now £26.20. It's a massive increase in just the space of, 2 or 3 years, 3 years. And it really shows that the Scottish Government, even though it's got a limited budget, the resource budget that it's been getting from the UK government has been falling in real terms when adjusted for inflation. But politics is all about choices. And it's very clear that this SNP Scottish Government, while it's not been doing everything perfectly, it's really prioritising tackling poverty. It's really putting its money where its mouth is. And that's great, because we should not have a single person, especially a single child, living in poverty. And I really hope that with independence, we will come a bit closer to tackling it.
Thank you. For our last story, BBC Scotland cancel the 9 and propose cutting news programming from 250 to 150 hours per year. BBC Scotland has announced the cancellation of the 9, the main evening news programme on the BBC Scotland channel. They have also cancelled the Edit and 7 Days, the channel's weekly news review programme. The BBC plan to replace the 9 with a 7 p.m. 30-minute news programme and will be cutting the channel's news content, not including current affairs programmes, from 250 hours a year agreed with Ofcom to 150. However, Ofcom will have to agree to the change. The BBC say they will be launching a new topical current affairs podcast and increasing live online reporting. According to the BBC, the changes will have no impact on its plans for jobs and investment in news and current affairs in Scotland. The Scottish Government is concerned how the shift away from terrestrial to online by the BBC will affect viewers, and are seeking reassurances that the needs of all Scottish viewers are considered. In a recent interview, the SNP Culture Secretary, Angus Robertson, spoke to the need for an independent public broadcaster in Scotland. Olaf, do you think that the BBC has been successful in broadcasting Scottish needs, ideals, and interests?
Well, look, the establishment of the BBC Scotland channel and things like the 9 has been a good start, but it's been nowhere near enough. I mean, look at the countries like Germany, like Denmark, for example. Every single Bundesland in Germany has a public state-funded broadcaster, broadcasting news full-time, broadcasting special TV content full-time, broadcasting commissions. There are Bundesländer in Germany which are, 500,000, 1 million people, 2 million people, less than Scotland's population, right? Scotland doesn't even have one full-time broadcaster. It's all very London-centric. How is it that Germany, or that the Faroe Islands of population less than 50,000, or that Iceland or that other countries can have broadcasters with a wealth of content being broadcast, and BBC Scotland can't even carry the nine. In a world where so much news is happening, where so much analysis is needed, they are cutting it because they don't see it's worth it. Of course, news is moving away from TV and radio towards digital. It's undeniable. But there's also a huge amount of people that still rely on TV and radio for their news, and it's a responsibility of the BBC, a public body that we all pay for, to uphold that. Look, imagine if we had an independent broadcaster in Scotland, like Broadcasting Scotland, right, with 1% of funding or 10% of funding that the BBC Scotland is getting. Imagine how much could be done in terms of creating news, in terms of creating original, debate and topical conversations and podcasts. We desperately need that. Scotland is completely undercovered when it comes to the UK news landscape. We have the majority of the big hitting political editors all living in the same postcode in London, all hanging out in the same clique. We need to change that. We've seen a decimation of local news as well, and we need to see local news being brought back again so that communities can engage with local politics and that local politicians can be held to account. Is hugely, hugely important in how a society works. It's instrumental to a healthy democracy. So, look, I really hope that we see an independent Scottish broadcaster, the sooner the better. We already have great broadcasters like Broadcasting Scotland. So, look, if you're watching, one thing that you can do right now, after this finishes in 2 minutes, is to donate to Broadcasting Scotland. It's hugely important. But also, support your local news station, support your local paper, buy a paper, watch local independent journalism. It's hugely important.
Well, thank you so much. And just like Olaf said right there, I'll be closing up for this evening. But before I go, I will remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very, very much. Our programme will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We are now just £1,000 short of our £10,000 target. Although the pressure has been eased, we really need to raise the last £1,000 immediately so we can pay our bills and then focus on securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. Thank you so much, Olaf, for joining me today. Would you like to say your goodbye?
No, thank you so much, Patryk, and thank you for everything that you do. I really enjoy this format, and I think it's so refreshing to cover news in depth, but also go through so many different topics. And of course, the Ukraine update is something that's quite unique when it comes to news coverage in Scotland. So thank you, and hope to be back at some point.
Yeah, it's been lovely having you, and I respect you sharing our interest in having this sort of Scottish broadcasting that represents the people here and can inform them of the matters that they need to be informed of. So, thank you, goodbye, and thank you for watching.